So, hi everyone again. Good morning. It seems that we have a very good turnout. We had a lot of people that registered for this webinar, but it's great to see that it's also reflected in a great turnout. So this is the third webinar of the European Society for Rural Sociology. For those of you who did not come to the previous two or did not watch it, the format is that basically it will unfold this way. We will have two brief presentations from Ruth and then from João, which I will be presenting in a short while. And then we will have sort of a debate discussion between them. I will give some prompts, but then, of course, they can also ask questions to each other. And then at the end, we will have time as well for Q&A, approximately 20 minutes. So that's the idea. So without any further ado, I will introduce Ruth. First of all, Ruth, thank you so much for accepting to be here, to be part of this. Ruth McAreavey is professor of sociology in geography, politics, and sociology at Newcastle University. Her research focuses on migration, governance, and ethics, with particular attention to the inequalities faced by migrants in the labor market in everyday life. She has published extensively on rural governance, regeneration, international migration, and research ethics and methodologies. She has a strong practitioner background, having previously worked in the voluntary and community sector and in local government, and continues to collaborate with external partners, including third sector organizations and local authorities. She has obtained funding from research foundations, government and industry, with projects generating significant social and policy impact. She's co-editor-in-chief of Sociologia Ruralis, the journal of the society, and an elected fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences, a trustee of Plunkett UK, and an active member of international research networks, including the European Society for Rural Sociology and the European Sociological Association. Welcome once again, Ruth, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jose, for that nice welcome. And hi, everybody. I see some familiar faces, so thank you for coming here today. I'm just going to share my screen and start my presentation. Okay, can you see my presentation okay? Yeah, great. Okay. So as Jose said, I'm going to be talking for about 10 minutes, and it's really just to set some of the context and set everything up before we move on to a nice discussion. And I really like this format because I think it's really good to be a bit interactive, because we can go in different directions depending on how we're all feeling and the sort of things that are interested to us. So as Jose said, I have worked in the rail world. At one point, I was a leader officer back in the 1990s, and I supported rural community organisations in accessing funding to advance their projects and to develop their ideas. And so that sort of connection to rural policy and practitioners has stayed with me throughout my life. And the other thing that I think it's probably relevant, I'm a lapsed economist. So my first degree was agricultural economics. And I found that I had too many questions that economists weren't able to answer. So I sort of moved into sociology. And what I'm going to do in this short presentation is talk a little bit about crisis before going on to talk about rurality and how it's manifest, given the multiple dynamics that are at play in rural space. And then I'll finish with just a little bit on knowledge construction and how power impacts on that sort of those dynamics. So a word on crisis, and the reason why I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this is because I think the whole sort of notion of narratives and crises and who gets to claim crisis is super important for understanding how power relations and indeed resources are shared in the rural space. But in order to do that, I think it's important to also set the rural within the wider context. So we need to think about international and global issues. We obviously have shifting geopolitics at the moment. We have various climate shocks, economic disruptions, and, as I said, dismantling of global order. Migration is also hugely impactful in rural spaces. But all of these major issues sort of lend to the language of crisis, and there's constant talk of crisis, polycrisis even. And I would argue that the narratives of crisis are very strongly rooted in power relations, and we can ask questions about, whose crisis we're in. Are we actually in crisis? And my colleague Jan Dobbernak, who's based here in Newcastle, has argued, he makes a really clear point. He asks who gets to claim crisis is a question which points towards material power that grants visibility and authorship. So it can be convenient to state that something is in crisis if it advances a particular position. And I think that's really important. And another aspect of crisis today is that they don't seem to be bounded by time. And I mean, maybe I'm looking at the past, not nostalgically, but it seems to me that in the past, crises seem to happen as a rupture, something that happened and we moved on quite quickly. So things like, there was a crisis when markets would crash, for instance, or due to a natural disaster. But there's a lack of temporal boundaries around crisis today, I think. And I think that can cause a very strong sense of frustration and hopelessness if there's nothing but crisis looming in the horizon. So the way the language is used around crisis is powerful, and it can also be highly damaging. If something is in a perpetual state of crisis, it makes it really visible. And so that opens it up to being constantly under scrutiny. And so we've seen that with, for instance, the migration crisis, this narrative of a migration crisis. And so it gives people license to constantly scrutinize what's happening and to sort of determine who is in crisis. And indeed, dimensions of the sort of left behind rural spaces, marginal places that are in crisis and in constant need of help and support and development, I think is a very political tactic and a very political tool. So language is important. And just to sort of finish up on crisis, I think what it does is that it can remove agency. And again, Jan Dobbernak argues that it creates these flat subjects, as he calls them, without agency, without structural location, historical memory, and consciousness beyond resentment. And I think that is a really powerful way of thinking about rural areas that are in so-called crisis. And that those sort of narratives stick. They stick to policymakers who start to sort of think about, rural areas being in need of help, in need of development. And that can sort of be in sharp contrast to urban areas where its narratives of urban areas need investment rather than development per se. So moving on then to think about the heterogeneity of rurality and, rural spaces and places. We know from the literature, rurality is a very contested concept. And it is so been, over 35 years ago, Keith Hoggart suggested that we do away with the rural. And he wasn't really arguing about dismissing the rural, but it was more recognizing that the undifferentiated use of the rural is problematic for research. And I think sometimes today in 2026, his arguments can be as relevant and as pertinent. So rural is not causal. It is not a concept per se. And I think to sort of think about rurality in some of the ways that maybe some policymakers do, or the general public, can make rurality seem as a blanket concept. And the ruralities obscures focus on people, on the materialities of the rural environment. And again, that is problematic. And we know now in the European context, rural areas are important. Around a quarter of the population, let's say, lives in rural areas, and in some places, some countries such as Estonia, it's much, much higher. And we know that rural areas are important. And, I don't need to labour that point because we're a society of rural sociologists. And one of the issues that's important is the sort of rural-urban interconnections, and those are critical for understanding rural areas, because rural areas are not in isolation. They don't sit in a vacuum. We have flows of global capital that go from urban to rural areas, and particularly if we're thinking about natural resources, if we're thinking about some of the sort of important aspects of life today, mining industry that's sort of shoring up some of the green transitions. So we need to think about in more of sort of whole of society, whole of territory approach, rather than setting up the sort of binary of the rural and urban areas. And that interconnection is important if we're thinking about how people think about rural spaces. And different interest groups, different stakeholders, different people have different experiences of the rural space. So here we see forestry, and there's also extractive industries, mining. And somebody with the experience of working as in a forest, maybe as a migrant worker in Sweden, is going to have a completely different sense of what the rural space is compared to an individual that has bought a second home, maybe lives in a pretty village such as this, and they're sort of buying into this nostalgia and this rural ideal. And compared to the sort of productive countryside where it can be a little bit messier, it's maybe not as pristine, and there's sort of different dynamics at play there. And we know that many rural areas also have an ageing population, challenges with service provision, challenges with young people moving out of rural areas. And the EU has been really instrumental in trying to address some of those challenges. And more recently, international migration has been quite widespread across Europe, across rural Europe. And in the past, there were just maybe some limited communities that experienced movement of people. And even within migration, with different types of migrants who have arrived here, we can see a picture of a family of refugees who've moved to a southern Italian town. And I think there, and we can dig into this more in the Q&A, but one of the sort of narratives of policymakers is, this crisis of the rural, the crisis of depopulation. Oh, here's a great solution. Let's sort of move some sort of newcomers into these communities. And I think that's highly problematic, because there are structural challenges within rural communities that haven't necessarily been addressed. And I would argue that the issues that drove young people, other families out of rural spaces, are the very issues that in another generation or so could well push some of the newcomer families out of the rural space. And of course, we have the agri-food sector, which attracts different types of stakeholders and interest groups. And there's a lot of research has been done around the exploitation of some workers in that sector. And that has also created diversity within the rural space as migrant workers, different types of migrant workers have moved to those rural spaces. So I think, what I'm trying to show here is the sort of dynamism of rural areas. They're not static, they're constantly changing, and there isn't a one size fits all. We need to be really cognizant of the territory, of the locality, of the specificity of place. So we have their microphone.
Depois de contar até 100, ela também escreve, porque o Pedro adora ficar contando até 5.
Valdemar, you've got your mic off and we can hear you. Okay. Okay, so I've got a little Mentimeter survey here, and if you're able to scan that on your phone, and you should go to Mentimeter, where you can answer a question, which is, what does rural development mean to you today? In a word, don't overthink it. And I don't know if people can get to that link. Maybe no one can get to it.
Hi, Ruth. It's Francesca. Can you go back to the previous slide so that we can scan the...
Yeah, that's no problem. And I've also put in the meeting chat the number of the Mentimeter link. Yeah, no problem. Oh, some people are typing in already, Francesca, so we have, can you use that code?
Yes, indeed, yes, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, great. So community, opportunity, childhood, opportunities. I'll just give it another few seconds in case people want to add anything else. Justice. Okay, so I mean, you know, the point here is that rurality and rural development mean quite different things, obviously depending who we're asking, but I think there's a thread there around people and around community, around society, which is important, the opportunities, justice, quality of life, and nostalgia. Some people are connecting to childhood there. So just to finish up, I'm conscious of time, this question of whose knowledge counts and whose knowledge counts can sort of create those narratives around the types of policy that is devised within the rural space. And I've already talked about the narratives of crisis, and I think, you know, there has been a lot of a tone of a crisis within the rural space, this notion of depopulation, marginalisation and poverty. And it's not to say that these issues aren't happening in the rural space, but that can obscure the material assets and the diversity and the very rich diversity of rural life, which obscures the opportunities that exist there. Expert versus lived knowledge is really important. So policymakers, I mean, certainly in the UK context, and I know it's not the same for all EU countries, but there's a very strong centralised government where a lot of policymakers maybe don't fully appreciate the materiality of the rural space. So they have this conceived notion about how policy should play out in the rural space. And that can often be in contradiction to the lived experience and the lived spaces that people reside in the rural areas. Conflict between stakeholders, if people, you know, depending where they're coming from, if they're sort of farming, if they're working in forestry, if they indeed are working in tourism, if they're international migrants to rural space, they have all got different values and different aspirations, and that plays into the narratives about rurality. And we also see corporate capture, and that's a really powerful aspect. And, you know, in my own research, I found how powerful agri-food businesses had a fast track to government and were able to get planning to advance their interests, which had a detrimental impact on the material aspect of rurality, because it was leading to pollution in rivers, because there was an over sort of production of chicken farms in a particular space, and we see that in other areas across Europe and indeed across the globe. And then finally, multi-level governance. You know, how do we sort of reconcile the different layers of governance and the different power relations that play out there? And I'll just finish by, and I'm sure we will pick up on this, just touching on this sort of the need to consider the different domains of sustainability. We need to think in terms of economic, environmental and social in interrelationship with one another, because they're not set apart. And I think policies can unravel and be less effective if policymakers simply are thinking about, you know, economic development and bringing up lagging areas, and if they don't sort of understand the sort of social dimensions and indeed the environmental dimensions. So I think the sort of focus on leaving no one behind is really interesting, because it sort of touches on those sort of entanglements of the economy, environment and society. I'm sorry for going over time, Jose, and I will leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. And I will pass immediately to the word to João, so then we have time for the discussion and then to the Q&A after that. It's interesting because João is not from a rural sociology background, so I believe it also will, bring a bit of different color to the discussion. We have this different fields and different perspectives, of course. So João is an ecosystem builder working at the intersection of entrepreneurship, research, and territorial development. He holds a PhD in business and economics from the University of Aveiro in Portugal and conducts research on entrepreneurial ecosystems in rural and low-density territories. He is also an assistant professor at the University of Maia, where he teaches entrepreneurship, innovation, and strategy. Beyond academia, he is the co-founder and coordinator of Rural Move, or Rural Move in Portuguese. It's exactly the same word. A non-profit association dedicated to repopulation, investment, and socioeconomic dynamization of rural territories in Portugal. He also works as a consultant and trainer in social innovation projects and serves on several advisory boards related to entrepreneurship, social innovation, agriculture, and rural development. Welcome, João. Thank you as well for accepting the invitation, and the floor
Yeah,
is yours.
thank you so much. I will share my screen. Well, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. For me as an early career researcher, is very good to be part of this. I finished my PhD last year, so 3 or 4 months ago. So it's very good to be here talking with Ruth, Professor Ruth, and with all of you. Yeah, in fact, I will try. I'm doing a bit of a different approach. I think Professor Ruth gave us a great overview of the theory and of the state of rural development theory also. And here I'm speaking a little bit of the Portuguese case, of the challenges and opportunities, also my interpretation of the Portuguese case, of the Portuguese rural areas, and then this practical case study of what we are doing in Rural Move here in Portugal. Yeah, so basically, we usually talk about this twin transition, but in fact, when we speak of rural areas, we speak of a lot of transitions: the climate transition, the ecological transition, the digital transition, the workforce transition, this geopolitical and security transition also affecting also the rural areas. And even and I would say that also because of the Portuguese case, also this democratic transition, where these left behind places usually are a fertile ground for more extreme political movements. So yeah, these are some images of rural Portugal, an aging country, depopulated, desertified. We have a lot of struggles with forest wildfires, and that is also mainly due to the amendment of the land and yeah. So this is the Portuguese reality. If so it's a little bit blurred, but this is the map of the sparsely populated areas in Portugal. And of course, you have the Nordic countries for other reasons, but then you have in Portugal and also in Spain the donut effect in Spain and the countryside, the border effect in Portugal. Where we have almost 80% of the country struggling with population renewal and yeah, and opportunities in every aspect. So this is the map of Portugal. These green municipalities are the municipalities considered low density territories according to the Portuguese law. And in this municipalities, they cover 80%. This is the 80% rule. The 80% of the country is predominantly rural areas, but 80% live in urban areas. So only 20% of the people live there. And also 80% of the municipalities lose population in the last 10 years. Of course, in the last 3-4 years, there was some recovery due to the migration, also in rural areas. But this is also something that is slowing down actually, because of some political measures to contain it. But there are some municipalities here who lose, which lose like 40% of their population in the last 10 years, so, or in the last 15 years, more or less. So yeah, this is an issue that we can see it in the. Sorry, it is in Portuguese. I forgot. This is an issue we can see it in the access to services of general interest, such as healthcare, education. You see here mostly a country focused in the metropolitan areas, and then some highlands in the rest of the country, which are the small-sized cities. Also, in the purchase power per capita, very concentrated in Lisbon and in Porto, and of course the variation of the population, where you can see the border regions, and especially the north and the north region, losing a lot of population in the last 10 years. But I'm an optimistic person, and something that motivated me also to start my research. I'm from a rural area. I'm from a village now with 4 people. When I lived there, there was, I don't know, 20 people. So in this middle of the country. So let me point out more or less here. So it's not, it's not so low populated, but yeah. And what motivated me was to start my research, and also to start Rural Move, was these opportunities that were also emerging after the pandemic. So if you want, I published a paper about post-pandemic opportunities for low-density territories. And I mean, I think all of us understand what are the opportunities. So this community, green transition, the green economy, the social economy. Also, this aging population brings other opportunities for the silver economy, the new remote working trends, also, and this importance of the community, the cultural, that I think it's also a very good opportunity. So we started, and I started talking a lot in here in Portugal about this new rurality. Of course, it's just a buzzword, but how we can see rural areas not just a place for agriculture and forestry. That's I think that's a vision widely disseminated in Portugal. When we have, for example, national institutions connected with rural development, usually they are connected with agriculture or forestry. And I think that also was a discussion in European institutions. So the creation of the Rural Pact to bring other areas also to the table. So we talk a lot about this new rurality to discuss rural areas with other topics and with other opportunities. My interpretation of this research and of my field work is that rural space is sometimes, and I agree with Professor Ruth also in our talk about the narratives. It's a very contested place. It's an imagined place, an utopian place, sometimes transactional place, and of course, a multifunction functional space. This is a great professor. Is already retired, Professor Antonio Covas, from University of Algarve. He called it the friends of the countryside, and he lists all the people that are competing for the use of rural areas. And we have the startuppers, the nostalgics, the tourists, the hunters, the radical sports enthusiasts, the energy prosumers, the consumers, the cultural heritage advocates, the farmers. So we have a lot of people competing for this space. And of course, I mean, this is an issue, but it's also an opportunity. So from my interpretation of working for I don't know 7 or 8 years with boots on the ground, I'm seeing rural areas in Portugal going from producer space. So this is the Douro, probably know Douro vineyards, from a producer space that of course still many of the regions are active, to a more produced and consumed space. As you know, Portugal is a very tourism plays an important role, and the rural areas also focused a lot in the last years on that. But my question is, can we discuss rural areas as a working and living space? And we see many trends in that direction. But could we think about rural areas again as a working and living space as they were in the past? Of course, not in the same occupations of the past. My research focused on entrepreneurial ecosystems, and I would like to share with you this need for ecosystems. So when we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, we talk about this set of actors and factors that connect with each other and help entrepreneurs to emerge and to grow. Of course, when we talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems, we usually talk about Silicon Valley. And my question for my PhD research was, we shouldn't use these urban models of Silicon Valley to create entrepreneurial ecosystems in rural areas. For example, the importance of natural capital, for example, of these endogenous products was not in these models of entrepreneurial ecosystems. So my PhD research was about this: how we can adapt these entrepreneurial ecosystems frameworks to the reality of the rural areas. And this is the model, the base model that I propose, that apart from the elements that usually are discussed, we need in rural areas foundational strategies for these elements to function. And these elements are very connected with governance, with translocal linkages. So and to summarize basically all my research, the importance of the ecosystem governance, the promotion of locally based structures, but also of the fostering of translocal networks, because they don't have all the resources locally. Also the importance of being rooted to the territorial and endogenous products, and also to have this long-term commitment to the strategy and to the investment in the invisible infrastructure. What we see in Portugal is the replication of these urban models, and you find a top incubator with a lot of space, but totally empty in a small village in Portugal. I usually use a phrase to summarize my research, which was said to me by the president of a rural municipality, which is roots and wings. So roots to be roots to do not forget where we come from, and wings to fly. And I connect that a lot with my with what rural areas need, because they need roots. They need to focus on the community, on locally based structure, but they also need wings to fly, to connect with other ecosystems, with other countries, with other actors, to co-create their future.
João,
From
if I can ask
to
you
summarize.
yeah, to wrap it up.
Yeah. I will.
Yes,
I
thanks.
will. To summarize, from theory to practice, in 2020, a group of people during the pandemic and in an online movement asked, shall we do something for Portuguese rural areas? And long story short, in 2026, we have this national platform for promoting rural communities in Portugal, which we call the meeting point of new rurality. We work with rural communities and also with rural movers, so people that want to move or live in rural Portugal. And we have a lot of projects, and then I can share you my presentation. We have a Rural Leaders Academy. We have a Rural Impact Hub, so a social incubator in a rural border territory. We have rural experiences with short-term remote working experiences in rural Portugal. And we are starting now this year an educational program to integrate young migrants in rural areas through heart therapy sessions, and also rural conversation led by young people, an Erasmus Plus project. So this we are a case study in a report of the Joint Research Center and the good practice in the Rural Pact platform. Yeah, so I think the impact is great. And to hand, rural future for me is a collective future. So we should rural development, in my opinion, depends less on attracting people and focusing on this hard infrastructure and on marketing strategies, and more on building ecosystems and building community managers that belong and that help shape their place, and that help attract new residents. So some references, and yeah, I'm totally available if you want to discuss a little bit more in this session or afterwards. Thank you. Sorry for my English. I'm not. For some time I didn't spoke English.
Thank you, João. I think it was perfectly fine. I will immediately pass to just to drop a short prompt and to motivate the beginning of this discussion. I took some notes and I tried to connect some points between things you both said in your own presentations. I mean, I particularly liked how Ruth started with this trying to understand how crisis and the idea of crisis, the narratives involved, and the
Sorry,
lack of
João, could you stop sharing?
And the lack of temporality which leads people which adds on already frustrated people to feel sort of close within this perpetuality, right? What you meant, the perpetual state of crisis. Also, what you said about the importance of understanding the politics of knowledge production and whose knowledge counts in rural areas, and how you connected that to structural problems for newcomers, particularly related with migration. João, you also mentioned a post-crisis context, but you stressed more on opportunities, and particularly on your work with all these projects, and how you try with your work on Rural Move to revitalize or to constitute a platform for revitalization of this rural territory. So what I would like to ask you, or to reflect on, is how do you see today's rural crisis between moments of danger with new challenges, particularly from, as João also mentioned, that coming from far right extremist movements that are attacking some of the migrant communities. I'm talking about the case of Portugal, which you know better, that are repopulating these rural areas. But also as an opening for new collective imaginaries of rural futures. And if you can give perhaps some specific, examples from your work on the ground, that would be nice for the participants, I believe. Maybe start with you, Ruth, and then sorry, João.
Okay, well, we can take a turnabout to start off, but thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the learning about the sort of the Portuguese context. I mean, I think that's a really hard question, and I think it's a really complex question, but I think there are, there is evidence that there is, I guess, action from below, people mobilizing and acting in solidarity with one another. And I think there's a lot of hope when we see communities moving to sort of valorize their assets and to sort of promote and advance the community ownership of assets. And I think that can be really powerful. And we've certainly seen that in the context of the UK and Ireland, where communities come together to, maybe own a village pub, or it could be the community buildings that they sort of then operate as a village hub that can do some of the things that are important for modern life, providing services for people to work from. I mean, I think one of the aspects of this is that we really do need action from national governments, because there are some systemic and structural issues that I don't think can be addressed from the locality, because we've seen evisceration of public services, which has stripped away a lot of the core services that we might expect of government. And then, there is a politics to this as well, because local communities can be empowered to do things themselves, but if things don't happen, the government walks away and it sort of just washes its hands of responsibility. So in my penultimate slide, where I sort of just threw in the concept of multi-level governance without exploring it, I do think that is an important aspect, because we need to have some sort of joining up between the different layers. And I see João has just put in the geography of discontent, and I was also mindful of the sort of rural consciousness and Kramer's work in the US, where there's that sort of resistance and that feeling that these communities have always been left behind. But I think that is some of that narrative, again, is politically charged, and it serves right-wing politicians to advance those narratives. So I think if there can be solidarity in a territory and a locality, but it does take a lot of leadership and strong leadership in order to drive that forward. So I'll leave it there. I'm sure we can pick up more on some of those things.
Yeah, something that I forgot, so I not forgot, but I didn't have time to develop in my presentation, was this narratives part. So actually, I'm from economic background, but from my PhD research, I started seeing these competing narratives in rural areas, especially related to entrepreneurship. So people that felt there are a lot of opportunities, there are a lot of cooperation, and the local actors are very active. And in the same building, there is some people saying exactly the opposite. So I started developing a little bit this. It's not a published work yet, but I'm developing a little bit more these competing narratives in rural areas related to entrepreneurship and innovation. And I think this narrative part is an important dimension, because when we talk about the geography of this content, I put here a blog post I wrote about Portugal, about the Portuguese case in Portuguese elections. We see that these narratives play an important role, also in this political uh, spectrum. So in this landscape, in this electoral landscape that happened last year in Portugal, the political narratives played an important role, and playing also an important role when discussing what we want for the rural future and rural development. Because, for example, I give a specific example. I was in the discussions of the Portuguese plan for the revival of the countryside, and because of the big, due to the forest fires, and there was a big discussion, and many people, many people, many policymakers, and also many academics, their idea for solving these forest wildfires, or for solving the problems of the wildfires, is basically to close the forest during the summer, so to not use it, because if there are people there, there are a risk of deaths and of other injuries, and so their idea is, we cannot solve this, we are too late, so we need to close basically a part of the country, to avoid close in of course, not in reality, but to avoid people use the forest. And I don't I'm totally against that, because if you have people using it, if you have people doing agriculture, doing forestry, but also doing sports, doing retreats, working remotely from villages, you have people using the land with their different uses, and that could also be at the medium long term, a way to solve this problem of the wildfires. So yeah, I think this narratives is a very important dimension, and I would like to stress that in this question about the crisis, because we sometimes tend to exaggerate, or to be too optimistic, and we need and of course this is not solved locally. This is a media narrative. This is also a political narrative.
José, can I just come in?
Sure, please.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think I mean, I don't know anything about forests and how fires operate, but I think that's a classic case, isn't it, of expert knowledge versus local knowledge? You know, because people who are embedded in that landscape and living in that place have a better understanding.
Yeah. But you have for example, some regional policy makers. So it's a bit tricky. It's not just like that. It's a bit tricky because you have even local policymakers saying that. So they don't. I think we don't know what to do, basically. So we don't know what to and we don't need to know, because one of the things that maybe we didn't discuss, and that's very important also, is that we talk about rural, but rural is very diverse, and in Portugal also. So you have Alentejo, it's totally different from the north, and the use of the land is totally different. So that's why we it's difficult to find a national model to and national measures to implement, and maybe that's difficult also to find a common narrative, a shared narrative to push forward. Yeah.
But is that not where local governance comes into play? Because then if you create the structures that allow those different stakeholders to come together so that there is a territorial approach, as opposed to an approach which is segmenting rural areas as one thing or another, but it sort of is cognizant of that specificity of place. And then, you know, you create those structures that are slightly different depending on where you are. I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I think it's an interesting dilemma.
I would like to add one dimension here to what you both just said. Ruth, you mentioned this, not sure you mentioned in these terms, but this mobilization from below or agency from below, the solidarity networks and community ownership of assets, as well as the need for strong leadership. And then, João, you sort of uh, focus on this problem that sometimes there's sort of a lack of knowledge, a lack of a shared narrative, because there's the use of land is diverse, the territories are diverse, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of hard to create this common goal that is at the same time adaptable to the diversity of the territory. So I would like to ask you from your experience in the field, if you think that this the new opportunities that you see, the changing rural territories, the changes that of course the crisis that bring the multifunctionality, uh, are they usually accompanied by a democratization of governance structures? Are the governance structures uh, in place, permeable to new people from below, come and really democratize that space, participate politically in that space, and specifically with the common activities, to with at the same time to challenging this. The privatization of space and resources, and bring together communal and solidarity networks that at the same time democratize these places. I'm really interested in this, and if you can tell us a bit about it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I can start. I don't think so, in my perspective. So it really depends. We work with some local governments that are very active and very open to discuss this new opportunity and this future of rural areas. Usually, it's more bottom. It's a more bottom up approach, and I know in many regions some bottom up initiatives of local actors trying to co-create something. Okay, for example, we are part of a cross-border initiative that I don't know even how this started, of people from Portugal and Spain in the border region, in the north border region, and it's a totally bottom-up approach. They created group works with different areas, and they organized several meetups in different villages to reflect and discuss and work on these ideas, and then maybe to work together in a proposal for an Interreg project, or for a Erasmus Plus project, or for a local project. But usually I don't see this being led by the local government. There are some cases, but I don't see that. So I think this you see that a lot in cities, more this co-creation sessions, sometimes led by even the municipalities. While the results then or the implementation could be discussed, but in rural areas, I don't see that a lot. We try to do that with Rural Move, promoting meetups and discussions with the local communities, and also to do, I think, a very important thing that is translating this policy language and this and this more theoretical and policy language into local action, and vice versa. So sometimes all these initiatives, what they lack is this framing of their project, or of their needs, or of their desires into a policy, or into a more structured project. So we try to do that with our communities. But yeah, I don't think we could talk about democratization of yeah, I don't know.
Ruth, what do you think?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I would agree with that. I don't think there's meaningful democratization happening at the grassroots. I mean, my experience, a lot of it in the UK, there's a lot of community activity, there are a lot of projects, there's a lot of co-creation, knowledge, co-design of projects. And in fact, I would say there's a proliferation of community activity, community development activity, but it's at a very sort of, I do think it's a little bit fragmented, and government remains very centralized, and it does not trust local communities to deliver on the bigger things, and they hold the purse strings for the big, the sort of larger policies. I'm not dismissing the community action. I think it's really powerful, and it obviously gives people a very strong sense of belonging, a strong sense of place. But there's something missing there in terms of just that link up to central government and influencing the questions that are being asked and the policies that are being designed. They are more sort of implementing projects. So no, I don't think there's more democracy.
I don't know if you have any question to each other. If you do, yeah, please. But if not, we can also open the floor to
Yeah, I think there's a question for João on the
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to read it, but I would first like to ask to the participants if they want to voice their questions, and then perhaps I can read them from the chat afterwards. So, questions.
I can ask a question to Ruth, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it's not my I'm not from a sociological background, sociology background. And this thing of the, I mean, this effective belonging to the rural area, and the importance of, because we live, as we talk a little bit in this huge transition, in this huge workforce transition, the digital transition, and we are increasingly mobile, multi-local. So we work in a place, we live in another, and we have relationships with the people from across the world. How is this affected? How is this belonging to a place? Um, I know it's important, but how it's evolving? So it's increasingly important, or it's being left out of the discussion?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I'll answer it as best as I can, but I'm sure it'll be an imperfect answer. I mean, as far as I can see it, I think despite the sort of fact that people are living in online communities and have these international, transnational connections, I think then maybe because of that, people are also seeking a very physical sense of belonging and a rootedness to a place. I mean, of course, it's not the case for everybody, because some people are happy to reside somewhere, and in fact, they could be anywhere they're working. They don't really interact with their natural environment or their community. But research definitely shows that place is important. It can help with well-being, and it can help with that sort of sense of being rooted. And there are all sorts of positive health implications. So I do think, despite the sort of technical world that we live in, people are seeking those connections at a very sort of visceral and real level. But it's not the same. It's a bit like rural. Human beings are very different. So we probably would need to understand a bit more about psychology as well. But people want to belong to communities, and some of that is rooted in place for sure.
Can I add quickly something to that, and to both of you? It's a very quick question. Do you see in this new communities, especially from those who come to live in rural areas and work remotely, do they really engage with the community that was already there, the local community, whatever we call it,
They
or
want to.
they want to, but is it, I mean, is it easy to do so, or there are obstacles, they face barriers? I mean, you have that experience, João, in working with them, so
Yeah, and I can answer to that with also and also answer the question in the chat. From our experience, so we work mainly with we see that people the two target groups that search for rural areas are young people in their 30s, like young couples, to start their families and to because they have now a more stable professional career. And the other group is people 50s, 50 plus, because they are in their early retirement, so they are preparing the retirement, so they are thinking of working, preparing for 10 to 10 years their retirement, and they start moving to searching for so, and this in these two target groups you have a lot of different people. So you have these remote workers, you have people that change their lifestyle and start, I don't know, a regenerative agriculture project, things like that. But the common ground is that they want to belong. So they and that was my question also to Ruth. They want to be part of the community. It's not so easy, and sometimes people that we help, that we know, that moved to a rural village. After 1 year, they started thinking that we need to revert our decision to get back to the city because we don't have a community. So and this is something that we struggle a lot and that we debate a lot with municipalities because they almost focused 100% on hard infrastructure, and people don't need a chair and a table to work because they have that at home most of the time. They need people to talk to. They need a community to be part of, and then you have. For example, in case of remote workers, you have a lot of co-working spaces, very dynamic and very active and full. And then you have, I mean, 70 or 80% of them, mostly led by public actors, totally empty because they don't even have a person of the municipality working there. So I think and it's not easy to for these neo-rurals because they usually they open their eyes to the world, so they come with new ideas. Of course, some of them are good, some of them are not adaptable to the local community, but there is this friction and this competing use of I mean of the funds, of the land, of everything. So in case of Portugal, we are a very conservative in rural areas. We are a very conservative country. So you have the cultural issue, you have the language issue, and I mean we don't have the infrastructural issue. I think so. We have some issues with the public services maybe, but not internet and things like that. But yeah, it's I mean it's our biggest challenge and our biggest concern, and that's why in Rural Move for since the beginning we have this role of community manager. So we have almost 40 community managers. So these are people volunteers living in their villages, and they are our boots on the ground volunteers to help these people and to create this all these dynamics and events and the discussions in their villages. So yeah, I think this role of community manager should be more should have more work on, and local municipalities, and this could be also a top-down approach to have these community managers in each rural municipality.
Can I just ask a question of clarification? So, João, how is Rural Move funded? Is it volunteer-led, or do you get funds from other sources?
we for 5 years we were volunteer lab. I'm still a volunteer, so I'm the coordinator, still volunteer. But for last year we have several projects funded by the Social Innovation Portugal. We have some private funds also, and in each project, I could send you also. For example, our social incubator is funded by the national government through a social innovation program, and by a local municipality and a bank and a company. So, and then other projects, for example, this project of migrants and the inclusion of migrants is funded by a bank also through their social innovation prices. So yeah, it's multiple. We have public funding from the national government, mainly through social innovation program. And then we have private funding from social investors. And then we have, and that's a sustainability issue that many local actors and many local associations struggle with. We are working on services, so we provide services to the municipalities. We can organize events, trainings. We can be responsible for working the strategy or to attract new residents. So we are trying to also to be professional as best as we can. And now we have 5 people working full time. So it's we are now yeah, growing a lot in this last year. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if there is any questions from the participants. I do have one more, but I don't want to overimpose myself. So, I mean, just to all of you, to all the participants.
Can I ask just one more theoretical question to Ruth? What are the trends in the journal in Sociologia Ruralis? It's easier to say in Portuguese.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What are the trends that you see that are, so what are the research trends now appearing in your journal? Because I think that's also a thing important to
Yeah.
discuss.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. A few years ago, we had a lot of food systems papers. We've had some on like digital agriculture. Because I guess we had some special issues which concentrated quite a lot of attention on some of these issues. We've a special issue on intersectionality and rurality coming, that's just out. There's quite a lot of attention on mobilities and rural areas, and diversity within rural areas due to refugees and also people working in agriculture. And then what are the other aspects? I'm just thinking about the papers that I'm handling. I would say broadly that's it, but I feel like there's less on social innovation. I mean, we've had a little bit, but not so much, which, I think it's an interesting topic. And obviously there's some stuff around more general rural development. And I guess the other area that we get papers is different dynamics and aspects of agriculture and, ecological transitions, all of those areas. Yeah. I probably left something out, João, but that's broadly what we see.
We do have a question.
Sorry,
No, I was just going to read a question we have on the chat. Just someone just wrote it now. From Sabrina. I am very interested in the role of community managers. They are spreading around in Italy as well, especially in rural areas, but there is no specific professional recognition nor an educational training path dedicated to this figure. Do you have any in Portugal? And what do you think should be the competences and knowledge basis for these figures? I mean, she's talking about community manager.
Yeah, I mean, we have internally, we have a community manager manual. We list all these competences and their role and what they should look for, and also and then we have also some capacity building programs for community managers. Last year, no, in 2024. We did a Rural Leaders Academy focused on community managers, also a funded project. We train 200 people from several municipalities in the center part of Portugal. Mostly focused on leadership competences and entrepreneurial skills also. So these entrepreneurial skills in the broad sense of how to plan, how to execute, how to measure the impact of a project. So internally we have all of that. So our community managers receive the manual and then participate in our training sessions. I don't know if there is something like an educational path or something like that. I know that in Spain, our partners in Spain from Cives Mundi, they have a course, an online course called Rural Social Innovation Agents. It's more like community manager. They run this online course. I'm trying to search for it. And yeah, and it was a more structured course for community managers in Spain. But yeah, I think it could be interesting. Maybe I'm connected with a lot of universities. Maybe we can talk about that.
I just added to the chat because I do remember, I guess I'm quite old, but a long time ago, we talked about community animators or community development managers. I don't know if the role is similar, but there used to be more funding from government for those sort of activities. And there were really, really like linchpins in those communities for doing work and providing a lot of support for the wider community.
Sorry, found it. I found it in the
Yeah, you just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. It's in Spanish, but if you are Italian, maybe you understand.
Do we have questions from the audience, from the participants? Any questions? We still have time. Yeah, Maria.
Yes, thank you, José. Thank you very much, both of you. Very interesting presentations and discussion. I have many notes here. I was very I'm a bit anxious on what is going to happen in rural areas in terms of, as you described it, this democracy transition, if I remember correctly, and also having in mind what's happening in Greece the past months with the strikes, and all these discussions about what is rural development, what's the role of farmers, what is going on if farmers are leaving from rural areas, what other neo-rurals are emerging. So the topic is very urgent, and I think it challenges many countries now. But I was wondering, because Ruth at her opening presentation raised the power relationships, okay, and the power struggles. So I was wondering if you can share, either in the UK or in Portugal, how do farmers are being represented collectively in terms of not only political parties, but how do they gather together and pressure how do they gain power through representation and governance? This is, I think, is very, very important in order to see how the future of the rural areas is shaped with or without them. I mean, in the discussions, whether they are included in the discussions since they don't have power. That's my question. Thank you very much.
Will I go first? Yeah. So, great question, Maria. And, you know, I think the first thing, certainly in the UK side, is there's such diversity in who or what constitutes a farmer. So we have very, very large landowners, like the Duke of Northumberland that owns so much of the northeast, and you know, the Duke of Westminster, the Duke of Buccleuch, and they're huge landed gentry, and they have done for generations. And they also have tenanted farmers who farm parts of their land, and that's through a sort of tenant agreement that runs over a number of years. And then we also have large agribusiness that's owned by private companies with some family farms, but not as much as probably you would get in Greece. And the way that what has been happening recently, it's a real populist movement. So we have a celebrity who used to present Top Gear, which is a car program, Jeremy Clarkson, and some people who enjoyed that program may know him because it's an international show, but he has bought a farm, and he explicitly said he bought the farm to avoid paying tax. But now he is mobilising farmers, and they're going to Westminster to protest. And you know, okay, because there have been some sort of policies like inheritance tax that has had not a it's potentially detrimental for some farmers, but that has been reversed because of this populist movement. So they are gaining power through populism and using that to mobilise in Westminster in a very visible way. But you know, I think that is really populist, and it's like misrecognition of what farming is in the UK. So there's all sorts of complexities there, and politics. And that's just one case study. I don't know in Portugal, João, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the case in Portugal, I would like to. I think it's a good example of representation. I think I'm part of the advisory board of the Young Farmers Association of Portugal, and we have several national organizations representing the farmers. We have two agricultural confederations, and then we have this Young Farmers Association, which is very active and with a lot of young farmers. And actually, even this latest discussion about the Mercosur agreement, in Portugal, there was not so much strikes, and so the discussion was very polite. I mean, of course, they have different views, they have different desires, but I mean, they are very engaged in this in the political debate. And for example, next week, it's curious because next week, all these farmers associations and confederations and Rural Move and other non-profit organization working on rural areas, we will have an hearing in the Portuguese Parliament Commission for Agriculture to specifically to talk about this issue of generational renewal in young farmers, but also in young rural entrepreneurs. That's our focus. More not so much on young farmers, more on other occupations. And we will have a hearing next week. So I mean, all afternoon with the Parliament. So I think this discussion it's actually a good example, and even the connection between these organizations and the Ministry for Agriculture is very good. I think, I mean, not good, and they are very connected and discuss a lot. So I think it's a good example. So in Portugal we didn't saw what happened in Greece and France and across Europe with the strikes. But of course we are worried. But I think we can have a good discussion about the future. So I think that's a good example of representation actually in the farmers community.
Thank you. Many thanks.
Thank you. We have, I think, perhaps one final question. It's for you, Ruth. We have it in our chat. Okay, I would like to ask Ruth about the definition of a rural stayer and farmer. Thank you. Okay, interesting.
Okay, great. Great question. I mean, it's interesting when we start to categorize rural residents, isn't it? So for me, a rural stayer is someone they may be engaged in farming, but they've grown up in a rural area and they clearly want to stay. And I know Tialda Hartson and other colleagues have done quite a lot of research in this, looking at rural stayers in Northern Ireland and in the Netherlands, and I think in Germany. So that's interesting. And then a farmer may be a newcomer to a rural area. I have a PhD researcher. She's just finishing up, Federica Constantina in Sicily, and she has looked at rural, like newcomers to farming in Sicily. So a farmer may be somebody who has long lived in a rural area or is a newcomer, and within that there could be all sorts of definitions. I mean, this kind of binary of staying and not staying is interesting, isn't it? But it captures some aspects of a person's identity, maybe not of all.
Yeah, can I add just one thing? Because I think this, so that these definitions are very important. We should not be too restrictive. I don't want to answer your question. I'm answering, for example, when we try to define, for example, remote worker, teleworker, digital nomad, and things like that, I think the concepts are very important and the definitions are very important, because sometimes the municipalities say, oh, we want to attract the digital nomads. But in fact, they want to attract people that work remotely, because digital nomads will leave after a few months. And they want to attract people that come to work remotely and stay. So they are not digital nomads. So and then they mask all these policies for different people, and and this impact the marketing strategies and so on. So I think it's very important to define who are these, who are we talking about. That's why I said to you, from our experience, we started seeing that let's focus on just two target groups: young couples and people that are in early retirement, because those are the target groups with most potential to revitalize these rural communities. Of course, we want young people with 20 years, but yeah, they should also go to the university to study and to have new ideas. So yeah, I think it's very important to define and then to not mess up all the rural development strategies with other concepts.
Thanks a lot. Annette, I don't know if you want to add anything. We are just close to our ending time. So would you like to add?
I don't want to add to the discussion. Just as Maria, I have a lot of notes in my book, so I just want to say thank you very much, Ruth and João, and also thanks to you, José, for arranging this. On behalf of the European Society for Rural Sociology, we're very happy that we have so many participants today. And we also organize other things. We have a call out at the moment for research and study groups. It closes very soon, but go to our website, ruralsociology.eu, and you can read more about it. And we will also have a call open in March for a summer school that will take place in July. But we will also be posting this on the social media. And there was a question about whether we would make the webinar recording available, and we will do that also. But thank you, everyone, and I'll give the word to you, José.